Okay.
Hello, John. Good morning. Good morning.
Natalie, good morning. Oh, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
From
That's right.
from Australia, yes, right.
Good afternoon from Australia and good morning from Israel, from
Yes.
the Mediterranean, just north of Tel Aviv.
Right.
John, I was I had an encounter with your writings a few months ago, with your articles, and I felt a sense of an awake, inquisitive, embodied writer, and it really turned me on. So this is why I contacted you. So thank you for, there's a dog here, so can you hear us?
I know.
We'll let it be. We'll let it be.
Absolutely fine with me, yeah.
Okay, so John, why don't you introduce yourself? Just maybe a few words about who you are, and then we'll continue.
Yes, all right. So my name's John Woodcock, and I'm currently living in Sydney, Australia, with my partner, Anita. And getting to Australia began when I was a year and a half, and we came over in the immigration procedures back in 1951. And then I grew up. So I grew up in Australia till I was about 29, and then I had an impulse to go to the United States. There's a lot of background to that story, of course, but and it was a little mad because I was working in Western Australia at the time, and I was pioneering a form of group work that they hadn't seen before. Community group work based on psychodrama, and the people of Western Australia and Australia hadn't seen that form of group work. So took about a year to get it into place, and I was doing really well. And then this mad impulse came to go to the USA. And all I knew was I was going to go over there to do further training, but I had no idea what that meant. So I originally got a visitor's visa and went over there, a 3-month visa with a few $1,000s, and planning to come back to Western Australia. Well, it only took a few weeks for that entire plan to disintegrate. And I knew with a certainty that I couldn't explain at the time that I was not going back to Australia. That was being in the USA in Los Angeles without knowing a soul. Mm. So I was living in a great deal of fear, and at the same time, this certainty that I wouldn't be going back to Australia. That uncertainty seems to come from the intuition more than anything. And so I started scrambling for work, finding a way to go back to school to get a license as a therapist in California, all of which I achieved, but in a state of high fear at the same time. And at the same time, almost as soon as I arrived in the United States, in Los Angeles, my dream life exploded. And I mean exploded. I mean, I was not in control of that one. And to this day, I do not know how I found my way to a Jungian analyst in Los Angeles, but I did. And he must have seen something going on with me that was resonant with Jungian psychology, because he agreed to see me. I was broke, so he agreed to see me for $30 a week, and I stayed with him for 3 years, once a week, for $30 a week. And my memory of him was that his job, we did very little interpretive work, very little. What he was doing was trying to hold the volume of the flow. So it was each week it was just with a new cascade of dreams, And they took on what the Jungian community calls an archetypal character. So in other words, dreams were being produced with figures and symbols that at that time I had no conscious relationship to. And a lot of them had to do with the Kundalini system, particularly the cobra. I was getting a lot of cobra dreams, and I had no relationship to any of that. So, and that's an invitation to go mad, actually. If you get no validation anywhere for what's going on inside, it can lead you to at least be marginalized. So, to make a long story short, he held it for me very well so that I could begin to form my relationship to this material myself. And then I left and I got married in Boston. We ended up in Seattle, and there I met an analyst who stayed with me for the next 10 years. And he was much more than an analyst for me. He was mentoring me into the depths of our being. And my dreams were the initiator of that process. He was just following what my dreams were saying. So I'll just say something about the first time I met him, and then I'll bring this little question to a close, if you like. When I was about 20 minutes late arriving for the session, he was waiting for me in his office, and I came bursting in, anxious about being late and apologizing, all of that stuff. And he waited till I'd finished all that, and then he said, well, while you're away, a snake crawled into my room, a real snake, crawled into his room and crawled across the floor. So he took that as his cue for our work. Because I've been having a ton of snake dreams, serpent dreams. So that kind of established where he and I were going, which we did for the next 10 years. And that's the huge story. It's the topic of several books I've written. But that led to studying for a PhD, and that would be another question. But when I got through the PhD...
What did you study?
Pardon?
What
Sorry?
was the PhD?
Oh, the PhD was on the phenomenon of the end of the world. And it only took 2.5 years to finish it, because by that time I was fairly well read, and I knew where to go to get corroboration for what I was trying to say. So, but after I finished that, I was soon on a plane back to Australia with my son to meet up again with Anita, my present partner, because we were partners in the 70s, studying psychology together, studying psychodrama together in Sydney and in Perth. And we just had one of those troubled, intensely passionate relationships that just couldn't find a way to work. So we had to go through our respective paths, and we came back together in 2003, and I've been here ever since. With her, and this time definitely worked.
Mm-hmm.
We're a little more seasoned.
Beautiful.
So that's a kind of a brief biography, mainly outer biography, of what I did and so on, how it would look to the public eye. But there's another biography as well that's inner, so we can come to that later on if you like.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So that's a short introduction. Yeah.
So how would you call yourself if somebody would ask you, John, who are you? What would you share?
Who am I? Are you talking about a client or somebody, or a colleague, or
a client?
It all depends on a client. I've given all of that up, Natalie. What the people who are drawn to me are drawn on the basis of, I want to go see John.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried all of the other ways, calling myself a mental health therapist, all of those labels, having a website that introduces me that way, but none of them are successful.
Mm-hmm.
The only success I've had in attracting people is when they're attracted to me on the basis of a story about my work, or about a colleague who knows how I work, and they might say, go see John. I even had young people who are getting to the same edge that I was at with an explosion of inner material, find their way to me somehow. And they're the ones that take, and they're the ones that where the work goes well.
Tell me about the nature of your work with clients. Now that you've probably seen hundreds of people throughout your practice, what is happening in the counseling room?
What's happening is I let them talk about anything they want. It's absolutely fine. Just tell me in your own words, your own language, what you think is going on that would warrant you coming to see me. So people do that in all sorts of styles of language, styles of discourse. It's just so varied. But what I'm doing, which I can do fairly well now, is I'm looking at the subtext. I'm looking at what's behind the language they're using, and I'll speak to that. I'll speak from what I see there. But I try to make what I say relevant to what the surface content is. So we're just not dividing like that, because most people have no idea about the subtext of their speech, and the subtext is where you get news of what's going on in the depths of their being. That's where you get it. Particularly, you talked about the word evolution before we turned the camera on, and but in evolutionary terms, the Western world, maybe the whole world now, is moving more and more to the surface, and we're developing styles of discourse that are only surface. So children are growing up not knowing what a metaphor is, for example, and they have no idea. And English teachers are noticing this, and of course technology encourages that. So the language is getting more and more superficial, and I'm not being pejorative there. I'm just saying it's more on the surface, literal language, and it's getting harder and harder to see how our deeper being can find a voice through that, because it's very hardened. But I can do it.
So when you looking and listening to the subtext,
yes,
then what do you do with the subtext that you hear? What's happening after that?
I let it speak to me. It comes as a silent voice, and I understand something about the person that I didn't know before. And that always has to be checked out, of course. Within the dynamics of the relationship, you can't just blurt it out. That's where psychological knowledge is important. Yeah.
Yes. So how is that valuable to the person? How is that understanding?
Great question, because what it does for the people who come to see me and want to stay, it opens a door to an aspect of their being that they had no idea about. And yet it's usually crying out in pain. So, for example, I've been working with a couple. In fact, Anita and I work with couples. She has a very different way of working, but we've found a way to make it work. We're working with this couple who are so socialized, so well connected, financially secure, and they don't have a clue what's going wrong in their marriage, except to put it in terms of not enough money or not enough time, things like that, which is where you have to start. So we did start there, and now after about 3 or 4 sessions, what they're both realizing, with tears in their eyes, that they have a deep longing for love, and they don't know how to ask. Now, if you're looking for a single cause of the intense suffering in many people, It's that they've lost the connection to love.
Mm.
And nothing in society supports a search for love.
Mm.
The search for security, yes, search for certainty, all of that's good. Search for comfort, all of that's well supported. But the search for love, no.
Mm-hmm.
So the subtext, more often than not, is telling me about anguish and suffering
Mm.
and disconnection from what makes us human, really.
Mm.
Love.
Wow. Are you talking about personal love or cosmic love or love as an essence?
That would be to think of love. I think of love as a fractal. It can show up on so many different levels, and one level is personal love. If it's personal love, then it's more in the land of the ego, and the person's just feeling thwarted. You know, I can't make a relationship work, things like that. But if it's working at a deeper level, they start to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Being thwarted is not suffering. It's just, you know, my will can't get its way. So help me. What's the problem? But at a deeper level, they're aware there's something amiss in their life, and they're beginning to suffer. They're not seeing it as a problem anymore. They're seeing it as more like an existential condition, or what I would say a soul condition,
Mm-hmm.
which love is, of course.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Can you give me a short, I want to delve into your writings and your perspectives. I have so many questions, and I want to make the interview short enough so it can be digestible in pieces.
Surely, yes.
So could you give me a quick example, really simple example of a person talking to you about something in their lives, and you are deciphering underneath that a subtext? Can you give me, I know you mentioned now love and this
Yes.
couple, but I'm curious to hear what did you see that they were talking about, and how did you decipher this subtext?
Right. It's yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to sit with that for a second.
Take your time.
Yeah. I can perceive within people's blaming each other, criticizing each other, thinking the other one's responsible for their own pain. I can see within that a suffering being, more often than not. When I can't see it, that means we should not be working together. So if I see somebody, you know, they might be behaving abominably, but if I can see this, they're longing for something, and it's no longer a problem for them, it's something they're suffering from. So those people, more often than not, have tried all the ways of the ego and the ways of modern therapy, you know, to solve the problem, you know, so that I can get my own way. But they don't. When that runs dry, that's when they're more likely to seek out somebody like myself, who doesn't. I don't take a problem-centered approach. I'm not into skills building, although I know how to do it. But that's not my primary orientation. My primary orientation is basically, in one way or another, tell me about your longing. Tell me about what living in this modern time is doing to your soul life.
Wow.
And then I can offer a different perspective on why they might be stumbling or in grave difficulty, even suicidal.
Beautiful. Wow. This is interesting, because this is where ensoulment, so when you're talking about subtext and the subtleties and the metaphors and the aspects, deeper aspects of being, it very much resonates with ensoulment and my work, my writings. And like you said, that love is a fractal, ensoulment and the soul is a fractal. It exists everywhere at many levels.
Yes.
This may be another conversation. So this is beautiful.
Right.
So you have a practice where you sit with people you listen, and you reveal together their longing. You reveal together their soul. And then
Yes.
once this is revealed, once this is on the surface, how does the transformation happens? Because you mentioned you don't take a problem approach, like, so you don't say, oh, this couple is longing for love. Now let me solve it with this. Let me prescribe this. So once the subtext and the subtleties and the soul starts to emerge and express, and it's very palpable and present in the room, what then?
Okay, this is a great question. As I said before, materialism is a kind of hardening of soul life.
Mm.
So nothing moves; it's fixed. That is the ailment of our time.
Mm.
And so, if I'm successful in awakening soul life, what you see is the soul beginning to move. Movement occurs. So that can be with fresh memories. That can be with an opening of the heart. That can be with emotions beginning to flow. Emotions are a very mysterious thing. We're the only animal that can do what we do with emotions. And the emotions, have, in my view, have everything to do with soul life. So when somebody tears up, like I saw the man in that couple the other day, very tough lawyer, corporations, used to big deals. When he started to soften and tell his wife how much he missed her when he was reaching out for love, just a slight softening around the eyes. And I could see movement starting up, soul movement. So I asked his wife, do you have a response? Did you notice him softening? And she was softening. Her eyes were softening. See, now that's soul movement. The soul is movement itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be the goal of my work. Not to solve a problem, not to impose a direction, but to see if I can, with their help, find a way to have soul movement. And that, of course, includes me. So I'm quite happy, more and more trusting of soul life, that I will say something that was be totally unexpected to me too. It just comes up and promotes movement. That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. And the movement itself is the transformation,
That's the transformation from fixity, thingness, substance, or if you want to go big, the metaphysical world, to a new kind of reality whose nature is fluidity itself. And we need to develop cultural practices that are in accord with that reality, the nature of reality as fluidity. So later on, if we get into that, this is the bigger questions of when you're speaking about evolution and transformation. That's what's happening. And and the people who come and see to me are usually ready for that. That when they start to soften and the movement starts to happen, it can be in other emotions as well as tears, but there's movement. And the idea for me in my practice is not to suddenly stop the movement by saying, let's analyze that, let's go into that, but like a soul moment is where an aspect of the soul fluidly comes into ascendance, like a blooming rose. It's there, it's lovely, but you don't cut the rose and look at the parts. As in an analysis, you just allow it to bloom, come into bloom. Everyone can smell the scent, and then it fades. And so the practice is to learn to live with that movement, without fixing anything. That's the new psychological practice, in my view.
My God, John, when you were describing this rose, I literally felt I felt the essence of the rose, and it really filled me up, and I almost teared up, because this is the beauty and the sacredness and the moment by moment arising and blossoming of
Yeah.
soul moments. It's so beautiful.
And that, see that if you accept that that's what's going on, then the next question, which I'll just put in, maybe put brackets around it if you like, but the next question would be, how do you develop a cultural practice that can articulate that fluidity, that rising into ascendance and dying out? What kind of cultural practice would support that? So
That's
we can cover that too, if you like. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I would like to. I would like to go into that right now. So it's interesting that how we are streaming, we are flowing together in the direction of the soul, which is what we have in common. Which probably is what, on a subtle level, attracted me to you. Uh,
Ah,
I believe that an important part of our evolution um, is through our own soul, through the soul of our moments and our encounters, and through the soul of the world. And that's what I am inquiring, exploring, investigating, not as a research, as a but more as a observing, listening to the subtleties. So yeah, so let's talk about, okay, so I'm writing here a little note that we're going to go into what are the cultural practices that we can cultivate, that allows fluidity, allows for soul moment, allow for the soul of our culture to come alive, the soul of our culture as humanity
right,
come alive.
right,
If
right.
you feel, if you feel that it's right to talk about it right now, we can do that. Just
Oh yeah, that's this is close to the heart of what I'm doing.
okay, great. So let's go into that.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at, you've looked at some of my literature, but what you'll see, all my books and essays are primarily about describing that reality or describing cultural practices that support that reality. That's what I'm doing. So there's a monumental shift that has to happen in our self-definition in order for us to be able to develop these practices. And the self-definition that is collectively in place now, although it seems to be falling apart, that's another story, is the willful subject, where the persons, we understand ourselves to be persons that are primarily will, and if anything's going to happen in this life, it'll be up to my will. That's the willful subject. And there's no sense that anything could happen to me that I don't initiate from that willful self.
Mm-hmm.
That's been driving Western culture for hundreds of years. You know, a lot of the literature places the pivotal figure as Descartes in the 16th century, as the figure that best encapsulates that self-definition. Now, that self-definition is giving way under impact, because that self-definition only understands static reality. That's all it can relate to. That's the metaphysical world.
Mm-hmm.
So the unknown was made into a substance like God and so on. So what you'd relate to the unchanging God, who is only goodness, omnipotence, and so on. This is the European culture.
Mm-hmm.
And there's practices that supported that kind of reality, that nature, the static nature, was of course literature with its predominance of nouns and which fixes, or psychology, which talks about content and uh, uh, substance and so on, philosophically substance. Now that's giving way under impact from reality, which is movement. So we've developed practices that support a static reality. Well, what do you do if you get noticed that reality is moving on. So Jung put it this way in his Zarathustra lectures, where he said, yeah, for a long time, going way back into the past, the psyche privileged the opposites, and we built a culture that was based on this reality that there are opposites, like good and evil, for example, a pair of opposites. There's a fixity to it, but we could very successfully build culture that could mirror and support this sense of reality being pairs of opposites that are against each other. So, you know, you look at the Inquisition. I mean, they absolutely knew what goodness was and what heresy was and the evil, and they could develop a culture. I mean, it's pretty hideous, but it's a viable culture that supports that notion. And that's what we've done for hundreds, thousands of years. Now, Jung said in Zarathustra, he says, the psyche has now moved on, which means it hasn't solved the problem of the opposites. It's not about overcoming. It's not about transcendence or resolution to those opposites. It's about losing interest in them. The psyche has simply moved on because its fundamental nature is fluidity. So in a very mysterious way, to put it playfully, the psyche enjoyed examining itself in terms of opposites.
And
So
how do you define a psyche?
Pardon? Say again?
Yeah. When you talk about the psyche, what do you mean?
I mean reality. The psyche. There's so many different ways of talking about the background to our lives, the mysterious background. I was trying not to use the word psyche because it's a bit loaded now. It's a bit encumbered. But so I'm just talking about reality, fluid nature of reality.
Yeah, but how do you relate to the word psyche? Just in a simple, so we can follow your story when you talk about
as the background to our lives that shows up through dreams, visions, culture, everything we do that's not involved in just sheer survival is an expression of or an articulation of psyche, or what I would say reality, the hidden reality. Hidden reality typically makes itself known through our prophets, oracles, soothsayers. They're the ones who get the news first, and it's always in hints, suggestions, or language that's very hard to read. And they're the ones who simply bring it forth.
So,
then culture begins to form.
Is it the hidden I mean, these are the vessels. These are the vessels through which the psyche expresses, through dreams, vision, culture, art, prophet, right, metaphors. But what is it? How would you? Is psyche synonymous with what? What other words is it? These are the vessels. All the examples you just gave. These are the vessels in which the psyche expresses. But what is the nature of the psyche?
Reality, fluidity.
Okay, so can we say that psyche is like reality?
It is reality. It is reality.
So your psyche and my psyche, your reality, my reality.
Oh, at a certain level, absolutely true.
Okay, so psyche you relate to as reality. Okay, got it. So now you mentioned that because your two primary questions is that you write about what is reality and what are the cultural practices that will facilitate fluidity, facilitate soul movement. And you started by saying that there's something flawed with how we self-define ourselves, which is a willful subject. There's me and what I want. Me and what I want, there's a will. Now, I'm curious, so let's finish this. So you said there's a change from this, from a willful subject to what?
Yes, okay, so let's go there. So first of all, when I say reality presents itself first to our oracles and our soothsayers, our augurs, the whisperers, you know, They're the ones who, they have successfully lowered their will so they can receive what Heidegger might say is the silent saying. They're able to go through the doors of silence, and they engage with the other, the mystery that wants to speak. And so it speaks silently to them, and their self-definition at that point becomes a mouthpiece. They're merely a mouthpiece. This is what the work of Peter Kingsley is excellent on when he talks about Paracelsus. That
What is
the god Peter Kingsley, he's very big on this too. That when the goddess said to Paracelsus in one way or another, all you have to do is say what I say. Don't change anything. Don't interpret. Don't bring your own opinions to what I'm saying. All you have to do is materialize what I'm saying through your mouth or through the written word. That's all you have to, that's all I want you to do. And so that in order to arrive there, the human subject has to lower their subjectivity. They have to, what they want doesn't count anymore. See, and that's, now bring that forward to today, and I think that's happening on a much larger level. That people who are have realities knocking on the door, and some people are turning towards it rather than away, and saying, "Let me be your voice." That's the new definition.
so?
I will speak on your behalf.
So from a willful subject
To a receiver.
to a receiver.
Yeah. A receiver of wisdom that the human being then simply speaks into the world. This is the realm of art. And there's a certain kind of poetry that is been explored since at least the early 20th century, which is trying to achieve just that. How can one through their poetry be a mouthpiece?
So we're just a vessel of wisdom.
Yes, with this new definition, yeah.
And where's our soul?
Where is it? Did you say? Oh, you said it before. Everywhere.
I mean, when you are a receiver of wisdom, it can be ancient wisdom, it can be future wisdom, it could be wisdom from other dimensions, from other intelligences.
That usually what happens when somebody turns towards this wisdom, this unconscious wisdom. What comes towards them first is the past. Our human heritage as laid down in the soul life. So it's very typical, and I had my share of this for many years, of having dreams of other cultures like the Kundalini, centuries ago, of European culture centuries ago. People typically, and I think not quite, they typically talk about past life experiences. I think that's going in the same direction, except they're a little bit literal about it. It really is it's a soul adventure. And when you turn to the soul for the first time, you're very likely to start getting emanations or presences from our collective past. That's when the soul first speaks through its past wisdoms. And that can be quite a ride.
So
and the important thing is not to literalize any of it. But
yes,
I did my share of that. It's pretty heady stuff.
Okay. So when you move from a willful subject to a receiver of wisdom, and you literally cultivate and refine your vessel such that it's such a sensitive and attuned vessel for wisdom.
Yes.
Wisdom as an essence. Okay, it's really not wisdom as an essence, like love is an essence, with all the fractal manifestation it has. So when you become a vessel for that, what is the difference between the wisdom that will flow through John versus the wisdom that will flow through Natalie?
Well, it's the same wisdom, but it can have different inflections, just like two artists who are able to get there produce very different paintings. You know, if you look at the art, the prophetic art of the 20th century, you get very, very different um, artworks, but what you may be able to see is the same subtext. You may
Yeah.
be able to see the same wisdom coming through, but inflected by local conditions, you might say. Somebody who has a particular kind of training or upbringing uh, will inflect the wisdom this way. But like compare Yeats's book Ulysses with a poem by T.S. Eliot. You know, they're very different, but they're both prophetic.
Mm.
And if with the refined cultural life, you can look at these two very different books and not get thrown off by the differences, but to see, oh my God, they're talking about the same thing. You can
Okay.
see, you can get a hint of that wisdom.
Beautiful, beautiful, great
Yeah.
example. So, John, then I'm also, in addition to being a mystic, I'm a modern mystic. So many times my mind is architected in a way that it looks at reality as structures. They're structures. They are, even though they're fluid structures, they are structures. There's a geometry of being, geometry of consciousness, geometry of reality. So if I'm going a little bit further into this transformation of culture from a willful subject to a receiver of wisdom, and I hear that it's like a piece of art where you can interpret it and write a poem or create a sculpture or paint in a different way that I would do. So the question is, what is the geometry, the mathematics? And again, we don't have to be so deep into that, but what is the relationship between a soul, your soul, and my soul, as it relates to this body of wisdom? So I understand that, of course, you'll have your own creative vessel, your own perspective. So how do you define a soul as a receiver of wisdom? And what's the difference between your soul and my soul? What makes that difference? If you can articulate a little bit more, I guess what I'm asking for relationship. I want to understand what's the relationship between my soul and your soul, between your soul and the body of wisdom and my soul and the body of wisdom, in addition to the example you gave about art.
I think that relationship is rooted in language. And um, our language at present enculturates us. We couldn't be enculturated without language. And language is also, as was discovered in the early 20th century or maybe the 19th century, for the first time in history, language was discovered as the vehicle of soul. Language per se. That's a big story. It's called the linguistic turn. So where do we look today to find the soul? Well, in the language. That's why I'm using words like subtext. So just to finish this piece up, so your soul life is expressed through your language. My soul life is expressed through my language, and that can feel like a unbridgeable gap. You know.
But what about Beethoven or Mozart? Their
Yes.
language, the symphonies.
You're talking about music now?
I'm saying, if I'm looking at Mozart or Beethoven or Bach, their language is creating symphonies. They don't speak at all.
Right.
So are you the linguistic Okay, so we have to wrap up
There,
in,
there, we
yeah,
have to wrap up. But
yeah, but
music, of course, is a cultural form that is so close to the reality that we're talking about here, fluid reality. I mean, look at the structure of music.
mm,
I mean, it's just it's almost fluidity. So that's why music was one of the highest art forms forever, because
mm,
there was it was like, how does reality want to first express itself? Well, music, sound. And how is it structured? Well, they started to lay it out, with signatures and bars, and or the most primitive music of all is in Australia. It's the didgeridoo. If you listen to the didgeridoo, you'll hear this drone going on forever. But what the Aboriginal hears is the all of nature speaking. That's the music of nature.
mm.
And there are some very skilled uh, didgeridoo players today that can even get it through to the white man. You can start to hear whales, you can start to hear kingfishers through
Mm.
their music.
I guess, John, the reason I was asking about linguistic is because some people's soul expresses through many other mediums, not necessarily language. So, do you include music and art as a language?
Of course,
Okay.
of course. So people who are from different countries, different ordinary language, they can play music together and fall in love. Love gets generated through the music they're playing together, and their souls are joined.
Mm.
And when the music finishes, so does that soul moment, like
Oh,
the rose. It
beautiful.
finishes, and you go back to your separateness. Maybe it's what.
So,
Or people. So yeah, people. For example, people told me when they went to concerts, certain concerts. I forget the group now, but it was the players were uh, what was it called, Black something, Black Sabbath. And when they played their concert, it was just musical, and they would go from coherence to chaos,
mm,
and everybody was with it. So everybody fell into chaos, and nobody knew if they'd come out of chaos or not. And sometimes the concerts ended in chaos, but sometimes it order would come, structure would come back in, and everybody would be joined. It was a religious experience.
yeah.
And of course,
So,
when you go out of the concert, after a while, that dies off, and you become
yes,
your separate selves again. So that
yes, yes. So, John, what differentiates your soul from my soul is the way we express.
in ordinary life, yes. Uh, Yes. So two people can appear to each other in their use of language, like as what happens with clients a lot. When somebody's talking to you, you think, "Oh my God, I don't know them at all." They're speaking about what's important to them, and I couldn't care less about that. All of that. But gradually, as more soul comes into the relationship, you start to see where you join,
Mm,
where you're not so different. So on matters of love, for example, that's almost universal.
mhm. Beautiful, beautiful. Let's pause here with matters of love
Sure.
because
Yes. Okay.
that's a good place. Matters of love, matters of the soul. Wow, fascinating conversation, John. I really appreciate your time. I
Oh,
appreciate,
thank you. Thank you. Your generosity is just incredible. I didn't expect this at all, but as soon as you invited me,
yes.
everything said yes. It was easy.
I listened to my soul this morning and I say, yeah, we're going to talk with John. And so I would love to continue. We'll schedule another time. And
Yeah, of course.
in the meantime, I really thank you for your generosity, your sharing, and your magnificent journey that led to this refinement of wisdom and love. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Natalie. And perhaps then I'll tell you how my life has been changed since the operation,
Yes.
because I've moved into another phase of my life,
Mm.
and be glad to include that as well.
Yeah, you
It's,
want
it's
to talk about
very it's very it's very relevant to what we're talking about. So.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about it now shortly? Because I have 2 more minutes, or would you like to talk about it
Well,
next?
I could just introduce it that since the operation, uh, most of all of the anxiety and fear that I felt before the operation has utterly vanished.
Wow.
So I spend much of my days in silence,
Mm.
sitting, not thinking about anything, not analyzing, not, I think writing may be finished for me.
Mm.
Now I'm doing something else, which I'll be shown what it is. I don't have a name for it, but boy, it feels different.
Wow. Wow.
Uh, I mean, in my dream life suggests as much. When I had did I tell you the dream I had before the operation? That my neurosurgeon, Dr. Shivalinga, plucked a pearl out of my brain.
Mm.
See, so that's with a dream like that, which I don't understand, but it's working on me still.
Mhm.
It's working on me.
Wow, John, this is
Yeah.
magnificent. I'm very curious to see what will emerge through this soul. What
Yeah.
Wow, it's beautiful.
So
Thank you.
yeah, so you're very welcome. You're very welcome, Natalie. Lovely to talk with you, and we'll just set up another time when you're
Yes,
ready, and we'll go for it.
we'll continue. Thank you very much, John. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Okay.